Five, three, two, one. Go.
Okay.
Welcome back again. Yeah. Good afternoon. I believe it's already afternoon. Yeah. I hope you're well. I hope you are well fed for those who take early lunch. Yeah. Because at this particular point, yeah, we are going to have drum rolls. A GDE will be gracing this session. I mean, when I say a GDE, what I mean is a Google developer expert. So a GDE in the cloud, you can imagine. Let's take a minute to, just internalize on what I just said. Yeah. So yeah, our speaker this afternoon is the cloud GDE Timothy Olaleke. He'll be guiding us through building and deploying containers on Google Cloud. You sure don't want to miss this. Yeah. So Timothy works at Mercury as a software engineer, and like I mentioned, he will walk us through a hands-on code lab on building source codes into container images and deploying on Google Cloud serverless infrastructure. So yeah, I am excited and I can't wait to learn a lot from a GDE. Like I mentioned, I hope you're also excited for this. So yeah, Timothy, our GDE, are you ready?
Yeah, Tabitha, I am.
Welcome.
Thank you
Take
very
us
much.
through.
All right, thanks, guys. And thank JJ Nairobi for this opportunity to share. This little knowledge I have on building containers and deploying on Google Cloud. So to get started, I really don't have a slides, but this is a code lab, so you'd probably see more demo, right? I'm just going to share my screen and sort of walk you through some of the few things I'll be doing. If if there's anything, maybe if my screen is not so clear, you can feel free to interrupt me, maybe via the chat, right? And Tabitha can just let me know if I need to adjust anything. Yeah, so my name is Timothy Olaleke, based in Nigeria. I'm a cloud GD also, and I also work as a software developer. Um, and then I'm very interested in cloud and DevOps automation. Um, I feel it's something I really love to do. It's my passion, even though I still write codes. And I'm walking you through some of the few things I've had to figure out while working with Google Cloud. Basically, as a developer, you have to sometimes you're working in a team where you don't have um, let's say dedicated DevOps team, or you don't have so much experience in deploying your codes. I'm sure this session is for you, right? If you are also interested in basically learning on how to sort of containerize your applications and deploy them directly from your source codes, this is also for you. This session wouldn't make you a DevOps engineer per se, but it's to just sort of guide you on a few things you should know about and um, ways you could automate your deployments as a developer or as a DevOps person, right? I'm going to jump right into it right now, and I'm just going to talk a bit about some of the things I think you should know about. So, initially, right, if you, as developers, we mostly work on projects whereby we most times have to deploy, right? You don't, you literally don't ship your system or your computer to your users. You have to deploy these applications for your users worldwide to use, right? And you really most times don't want to go too much and sort of disturb yourself about the nitty gritty details of how these things work. You probably would like it much more when it's goes through an easier flow and you're able to deploy seamlessly without having to bother about a whole lot of things, right? And we'll be talking about some of the managed services Google Cloud provides that allows you easily automate your deployments and ship your code out there to your users. So I'm sure a few of us have probably worked with huge systems or projects in the past, or we're probably planning to, right? Deploying these things, right? Deploying projects, monolith applications, probably applications that has a single code base for everything. Most times is usually a headache, right? It's a pain, and it's quite difficult doing these things, right? And that's probably what brought about the concept of microservices, whereby you see people sort of decoupling the applications um, as services, right? So you could have your backend as a different service, and maybe sub components of your backend as different services. So you could have like your mailing service, um, or maybe a service that interacts with the database, and decoupling basically most of the functionalities you have within your application. Now, you basically can term all those things as microservices, right? Because they are minor services that come together to form the whole application, rather than having to build everything as a single monolith application, right? Um, and then you would also most times want to deploy all these things and also have them interact with each other. Um, so they're going to be available to your users, right? So, I mean, and one of the good things you can do when you have your services decoupled as microservices is to, containerize them and have them shipped out there to your users, right? So when they're containerized, it's quite easier for you to deploy than just having to deploy your codes directly. So I'm going to give a very this example. I think I saw this example online some few days ago, where someone made an example of what containers are. So this is basically just for beginners, those that are not familiar with what containers are. Right? Containers are just basically this way you get to couple your code and its dependencies so that it can be run anywhere, right? As long as there's a containerization. So a very typical example I saw was take noodles for example, right? Noodles basically have like the noodle itself and then the spices, which basically gives you all you need to cook and eat. And that's sort of what a container is like. You have this container image that contains your source code and dependencies it's required to run. So say for example you are a Python developer and you work with Flask. Um, Usually, if you're to work on your system, what you would need is to install Python and pip and also Flask itself. But then with containers, you can also just package all these things, like set up your dependencies and um, set up the Python image, copy your codes, and do pip install within your Docker file, right? Because you basically use the Docker file to build your containers. And at the end, you can build your image, which contains your codes and your dependencies and every other configuration you have, and just deploy that container. So basically, containers just makes the whole workflow for developers way easier, and it also helps the operations guys to help easily deploy your applications, right, and move it away from your local workspace to production or live environments where your users can access it. So one more thing I was also talking about today is Google Cloud's managed services. Eddie, which was our first speaker, spoke about a whole lot of services, spoke about App Engine, right? And it's supposed to spoke about also virtual machines. So in the past, probably what I also did in the past was I'll probably have a GitHub repository where I'll be working, and whenever I make changes to this repository, I would have to sort of SSH into the virtual machine, which is more like my server where I'm deploying the application. And I would have to start running commands like git pull within that server to pull the latest updates I've made on my Git repo. And when I pull those changes, sometimes I might find conflicts, and this is sort of not the best way to work, right? Eddie gave a lot of updates about highlights about CI/CD, right? Continuous integration and continuous deployments, which basically makes the whole workflow a whole lot easier for developers, right? When you want to, continuously deploy your updates to your application. So Google Cloud basically has like so many managed services. Services like App Engine. You also have Cloud On, right, which is the newest in the family of Google Cloud managed services, right, for serverless. And the way Cloud On works is Cloud On. I'll just basically share my screen and walk through. So you can check out Cloud On page by going to cloud.run, right? And Cloud One is basically a fully managed compute platform for deploying applications, right? Um, and this is a way better, actually more better way to deploy applications because you don't have to um, think about things like resources for your virtual machines. Say things like how many space you need to give it in terms of hard drive, things like the number of RAM specified per applications, and a whole lot of other networking issues and all of that. Right, Cloud Run is a managed service by Google that basically helps you takes care of all of these things, right? And the best part of Cloud Run is that you basically just bring your container. So as a developer, you're working on an application, and all you do is just bundle the application into a container image, and you pick that image and hand it over to Cloud Run, and it gets deployed, right? Which makes the whole workflow way more easier for you because you don't have to sort of spin up a server, configure your server, set up networking, set up load balancers, and a whole lot of other things you need to do usually. You don't have to bother about those things anymore if you're using Cloud Run. So Cloud Run is more like a managed compute platform, takes care of all of these things for you, right? And best part is it also scales. So whenever your application needs more resources, Cloud Run basically just scales up and also scales down when there's no much request or traffic to your application. So unlike App Engine and other provisions managed serverless out there, you really can just use your Docker file. Cloud Run basically can work with any language as long as you're able to containerize, the whole thing. And I think it also supports build packs. So even if you are not sort of using Docker files and all, it supports build packs also, which is sort of what Heroku uses, right? But now what I'm talking about today majorly is it's basically how to move from your source codes directly to deployment, right? Using Cloud Run. So what we're doing is would have a sample source code. So I just sort of made this sample source code here, where we write our codes and we make changes to them and see that those changes get deployed directly on Cloud Run, right? And the best part is you really don't sort of need to worry about a whole lot of things like configuring your resources and all of that. All you just need to do is to connect your repository to Cloud Run and it gets deployed. And whenever you make changes, you get this continuous deployment, right, which Eddie talked about in this session, where all of the changes are continuously deployed to your service. And I'll also talk about some of the benefits you get when using Cloud Run. So I'm going to jump into the demo now quickly. I could just make my screen a bit. Okay, cool. So I made this very small repository, right? That shows it's really a Flask app, right? Based on Python, and I'll just sort of run through all of the files we have there. So if you're familiar with Python, Flask, or this can be anything else. It can be Node.js, it can be PHP, and every other language out there, right? It's just simple routes that returns welcome when you go to like the index page, the routes page, right? That's all. That's my code. That's in the code, and then my Docker file is what I'll be using to build the containers. So as you can see from here, I'm sort of getting the Python based image. I'm updating the um, the Python image, and I'm running pip. I'm installing pip, which is what you need to run Python locally, right? And I'm copying my files. I'm installing my requirements from my requirements file, and I'm running the code you saw here, right? So all of this is just like basic. This is a basic Docker file. You could have, depending on whatever language you're using, or whatever you're doing, you might have a more robust file. But this is just something just to walk us through. And then after that, the next thing is that shows the requirements that we're using, right? And I'm sorry, 1 minute, please. Okay, yeah. So I mean, basically, all you need is just to have your repository set up, right? And this is where we're going to be triggering our deployments from. So whenever we make updates to this repository, we want those updates to be deployed instantly on Cloud Run. And like I said, Cloud Run, you don't have to think about a whole lot of things like configuring the server and all of that. So Google takes care of all of that for you. All you just need to do is to provide your repository, and your whole codes and configurations and dependencies get built into an image, which gets pushed to Google Container Registry. So Google has this place content registry where all of your images are being stored, and the tool that takes care of building and deploying building these images is called Cloud Build, which Eddie talked about in his talk. So what I would do now is to just walk through, a minor walkthrough on how to sort of configure continuous deployments from source code directly to Cloud Run. So you can see this is what Cloud Run interface looks like. You can just head over to console.cloud.google.com/run, right? And I have a single service deployed, right? I can click on the service and show you how it's deployed. So every service you deploy on Cloud One gets a URL, right, which is secured, right, HTTPS, and you you can also deploy. You can also map a custom domain to every service you have, and you have very nice, cool analytics and login features available, right. But walk through all of those once we're done deploying our own service. So what I'm going to do now is to sort of deploy this application we have on Git, the GDE Nairobi demo, right? And the first thing I'm going to do is on Cloud One interface, I'm going to click Create New Service, right? So this basically wants to create a service for you. A service is more like a deployment, right? And you can configure this as much as you wish. So Cloud One is basically split into two platforms. You have Cloud One fully managed, whereby it runs on. So Cloud One basically is a Knative um, service that sort of runs on Google's Kubernetes um, services, right? But if you're using the phone managed, it means you don't have to set up a Kubernetes cluster yourself. It runs on Google's own Kubernetes clusters. All you just need to do is to sort of provide what you want to deploy, and it gets deployed for you. There is also Cloud One for Anthos, which has to do with you setting up your own custom Google Kubernetes engine cluster, and that allows you to have more flexibility over your applications. But then we're going with Cloud One fully managed for now, and you can select your region. So I'm just going to use the Europe West 4 region, and your service name. So I'm going to call this let's say GDG Nairobi, and your authentication. So you could want to make your service protected and requires authentication before it's accessible, or you could want to make it public. So I'm going to make this public so anyone can access it. So this is like the initial configuration you need to do for your Cloud One services. I'll just make this a bit bigger. Select the platform you want to use, whether it's fully managed or you want to run it on Anthos. That's your custom GKE cluster. Enter the service name, and then select your authentication type if you want it to require authentication or you want it to be a public service. Then once you're done with this, click next. And next thing you need to do now is select your container image. So like I said earlier, your containers get built using Google Cloud Build, right? And once these images are built, they get pushed to Google Container Registry, GCR. So if you had previous images you wanted to deploy, you had pre-built using Google Cloud Build, you can as well just select, those repositories here, and you're going to see a list of all the images you have. Right now, I don't have any. The only image that is here, it's the default Hello World image you can see, right? Which is what I used to deploy this here. And if you had your own custom images, you can select the image here. But since I'm not doing that, I'm just going to cancel this, right? What I want is continuous deployments from a particular source repo, right? So what this does is, if you select this, you are going to set up, it's going to configure Cloud Build, right, to automatically listen to changes that has been made to that particular repository on any of your source repositories, which could be GitHub, Cloud Source Repos, or even Bitbucket. And whenever changes are made to those repositories on a particular branch, it picks the changes, builds a new image, and deploys to Cloud One for you. So I'm going to configure setup with Cloud Build. I'm going to click on this button here, and I'm doing this for the first time here, and what you just need to do is to enable this APIs. So you need to enable the Cloud Build API, enable Cloud Source Repos, and enable Containers API. Right. All of these are just part of the tools that help you build and secure your images on Google Cloud. Right. And once all of that is done, you can go ahead and configure your repository. So you could be pulling your codes in from either GitHub, Bitbucket, or Cloud Source Repos, which is Google's own VCS. I'm going ahead with GitHub since we have our code here on GitHub, and I'm going to select the repository. I can just sort of do a filter here to filter for the repository name. So my repository is called GDG Nairobi demo. I'm going to select that, and yep, selected the repository. I'm going to click next. So you could do this to any of the repositories, either it's on GitHub, Bitbucket, or CSR, Cloud Source Repos. And once you're done, it's going to sort of pull in your codes, and you're going to configure your build settings. So you might want to be building, so there are times where you sort of want to have your service deployed in two environments, development, production, working with the master branch. This comes type. So are you building your email file, your artifacts, or are you building using build packs? So since I have a Docker file, which I showed you here, right, this file here, this builds my container image, installs my dependencies and runs my application. I'm going to select my Docker file and also select the path to where Docker file is. So you can see my Docker file is on my roots of the application. So if you had your Docker file in somewhere, say in a subfolder, say scripts, you can just enter scripts like this. But since I have mine in the roots of my repository, I'm going to leave this as default. And I'm going to save the settings. I'm going also with the master branch because that's my only branch right now. I'll save this, and so this is configured. And what happens is whenever I make changes to my repository on the master branch, it's going to trigger a new build. So Cloud Build is more like Google's own CI/CD tool that sort of integrates with your source repositories. It listens to changes and triggers some commands which you have pre-configured. And then once those commands are done, right, if you want to deploy it to, let's say, Cloud Run or GKE in your commands, all of that's going to get done on Cloud Build. So I'm going to create this now. So you can also set advanced settings on Cloud Run. So say things like your application is listening on a particular port. And this is really cool because most times you're listening on different ports and you want to configure that. If you check my application in my app.py, I really do not hard code this. I just listened on an open port. So I'm listening. It's getting the ports from my environment variables, right? And from here, I'm passing it as ATAT, right? If you have, let's say, special startup commands you're using, you can specify all of those here in your entry points. Now, talking about resources, you can also scale your Cloud Run service higher resources. So I can change this from 256 megabytes to something higher, say 2 gig or 4 gig, and so on. You can also increase the number of CPU that you can increase the time and a whole lot of other things, right? You also can set environment variables. So let's say I'm working with a service whereby I need to configure environments and maybe API key as maybe GDG Nairobi. So although I'm not using environment variables in my code, but then this shows you can configure this, and you can also use tools like Secret Manager to configure your secrets, right? If you don't want them directly on your service. You can also make connections to things like Cloud SQL. So if you sort of need some connections, you might just want to just set up the Cloud SQL connection here, so you don't have to, hard code your SQL connection strings and all of that within your code, right? So that's like so much you can do with there's so much you can do with Cloud Run, right? So I'm just going to create this service now, and it's going to take some minutes, but we'll see magic once it's done, right? So the good thing about Cloud Run is like once it deploys the services, it also deploys new revision whenever there are changes made to your application, right? And it gives you this URL which is SSL enabled, right? To access your over here. On the right hand side of your screen, you can see information about your service that's just deployed. Things like your image URL, on GCL, a whole lot of other information like your resources, your auto scaling information, all of that. So this is done deploying. I'm going to click on the URL now, and let's refresh this. Looks like it's still building. Okay, so it shows this, and one good thing you could do, is to check your logs. So whenever you have things like, and one of the benefits of using Cloud Run is you have Stackdriver, right, integrated within the Cloud Run environment. So we could just go over to the logs and see what's wrong. So I'm heading to the logs now. The logs basically shows you, right, a list of things that happen in your service, right? So you can see the logs of your application. It's listing on the port specified. Okay, I think it's available now. So we could try visiting again and see. Yep, and it works now. Yep. So it's fully deployed now. This is what I'm returning when you visit the slash routes. And you can view your logs whenever you want to see what's happening in your application. You can also map a custom domain if you don't want to use this .run URL that you get from Google. Although this is HTTPS enabled, you also get SSL on your own custom domain, right? You can use your continuous deployment details if you want to change your deployment from, let's say, a branch to another branch. You can restrict permissions on your service, so you don't want it to be publicly accessible anymore. Now, the best part in all of this is deployed on Kubernetes, so it auto scales and has like really great features. If you want to go into advanced details and see what is actually happening under the hood, you can come to this where you have YAML, the tab, and instead of review the YAML details of, you can also edit, right, the YAML configuration for your service. Like I said, this is deployed on Google's Cloud Kubernetes clusters, right, using Knative, and that's what makes it serverless. Right, you can also view more details about your service, check out your metrics, and a whole lot of cool things, right? So I'm going to make a quick change now, and we'll see how that works. So I'm just going to go to my application, edit my source codes from Git here, and I'd want the changes to get deployed instantly. So I'm going to say welcome to GDG Nairobi, and I'm just going to save this. So I'm pushing directly to master here. Once I make this change, if we go back to Cloud Run, right, and click on revisions, it's going to take a while to sort of build the new update. So you can check Cloud, see what's happening. So you can see it has realized, so 14 seconds ago, I made a change, and you can check to investigate what's actually happening under the hood. Like what it does, in the source codes from GitHub, and then using the Docker file I have, also runs Docker push to push the code to GCL, and then finally it updates the service I have on Cloud Run. So we can check each of the steps and see how far they're going. So it's building the image. This is what you get when you build Docker images, right? And once it's done building the image, it starts pushing it to GCL. So you can see it's pushing the image right now to Google Container Registry. And once that's done, it's going to deploy the service, just update the deployments we have, the existing deployments we already have. and you would see the changes you have on the URL. I mean, yeah, so there are a lot of cool things you could do with Cloud Build itself. Um, I think in the past I've used Cloud Build to basically build things like Gradle, Android APKs. So that, I mean, if you really don't want to work on your machine, you can shift all of your builds directly to the cloud. Right? Let Cloud build images for you, and it's pretty fast. And you don't also don't need to store these artifacts on your PC if you don't need to. So this is done building. We can go back to Cloud Run to see if a new revision has been deployed. So our service is GDE Nairobi. Under revisions, we have a new revision just now, and this happened because we made a change on our repository on GitHub, and now if I click on the URL, um, let's see, yep. So we have welcome to GDE Nairobi, which is the new message I'm passing from my code. So whenever you make changes now on your code base, you get those changes reflected on your URL instantly, right? So Cloud1 is really cool. It's a really cool tool for developers, and you don't have to think about setting up a server and automation yourself. You don't even have to write the CI/CD pipelines yourself. You could just do that directly from Cloud1. So one other cool thing I mentioned is you can map the custom domains. So if I click manage custom domains here, all you need to do is to sort of configure a domain that you want to attach with Cloud1. Um, Select the service, enter the domain here, and once you're done, you can verify and map your domain, and you get SSL directly on that domain using Let's Encrypt. And it makes your whole workflow pretty cool. You don't have to bother about things like getting SSL certificate and a whole lot of other things you would have to do manually. Um, So, yep, I'm just going to round up with this and, check out if you have any other questions. Cloudwell is a really useful tool. You could use it for sort of anything, for building backend systems and, your front-end applications. You could also dig more into documentation to find out more details. Like, I basically use Cloud1 for almost anything right now, even to deploy, let's say, WordPress applications, because it's really cheap. If you check the pricing, it's really really cheap. You get this free tier, so you get, I think, for the first 2 million requests that get sent to your service per month, it's free, right? And that's probably something you really wouldn't have in a small application with less users. So this means, I mean, for each for the first 2 million users that comes to your site per month, it's free of charge, right? So you're basically not even paying anything, right? If you don't have up to 2 million users per month, you just have your service running, right? And it's automatically configured to auto deploy whenever you have new changes in your code base. And when you sort of go over this 2 million requests, you start paying $0.4 per million requests subsequently after the first 2 million requests. So this is super cheap. This is probably something you can imagine you're not even paying for anything when you're using Cloud One, because it's fully managed. It's a serverless provision, right? And you only get to pay for what you use, right? Unlike where you have to set up a virtual machine by yourself, or pay for using GKE clusters because you have VM running, or even App Engine, because App Engine basically uses virtual machines under the hood, right? With Cloud One, it's all running on Google's own infrastructure, and you only pay, right, for when you go above this 2 million threshold request per month. So you could just sort of go to cloud.run, and you'd find documentation, a whole lot of cool things you could do with Cloud Run, right? So I'm going to check for questions now and try to answer them.
Awesome. Thank you, Timothy, for taking time to take us through Cloud Run. Yeah, we have a couple of questions from the audience. So someone is asking, could we say that Cloud Run can be used as a hosting service, or?
Okay, yeah. So what I would say about that is yes, definitely you could use Cloud Run as your own personal hosting service as a developer. I mean, consider it to be like Heroku, right? Where you could sort of configure Heroku to work with your code base, right? And whenever you have changes, Heroku auto deploys for you, and you have this URL you can always access. So personally, as developers, I think Cloud Run should be one of your best hosting services out there for your personal projects, or even for you know um, your company projects and all, right? Because it's highly scalable, it has all of the features you'd get from a regular hosting provider. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. So, in line with that is another question from the audience as well. I think it's kind of similar to what you've actually answered, but let me just put it out there in case there's anything else you need to add. So, does Google Cloud Run have features similar to other platforms like Netlify, where you can simply select the GitHub project and deploy?
Yep. I'm not sure if, yeah, exactly. So this is basically what we just demoed. So you can select your GitHub, your GitHub repository or Bitbucket or cloud source repos. And what it does is to listen to changes on those repositories, right? And you can also, limit it down to a particular branch. And once changes are made on those branches, it triggers a new deployment for you, right, on your service. So yeah, definitely.
Okay, awesome. One last question. For the file containing Python code, that is the app.py, right? Is Python compulsory? Like, can you use JavaScript or another programming language?
Oh yes, definitely. So on Cloud One, you can basically use any language, right? Be it Go, PHP, um, JavaScript, Python, whatsoever. All you need to do is to create a Docker file that is meant to bundle your source code and its dependencies, right? Your regular Docker file. So I'm sure you can find Docker files for almost any project online, right? Just sort of Google Docker file for JavaScript or for Node.js, and you would find the configuration and all of that. So yes, it works for any language. All you need to do is sort of write your Docker file that builds your image, and that's all. You're fine.
What about the overhead charges that may come with Cloud Run? Like, what happens after the 1 year $300 credits given?
Oh yeah, cool. So Cloud1 is on its own is more like a free service. It doesn't really have to do with your $300 for 1 year, 12 months. On its own, Cloud1 is a free service. Right, you get 2 million requests. The first 2 million requests to your service per month is free of charge, irrespective of whether you have the free tier or not, whether you've exhausted your $300 or not. The first 2 million requests that comes to your service is free, and then what you get to pay subsequently per million request is 0.4 US dollars, which is basically ignorable.
Yeah, okay. That is interesting. Okay. Thank you so much for the informative session. Thank you for teaching us about Cloud Run. I'm sure there's some people who didn't know about it, but now they do. And I really hope the audience has relearned a number from your session today. And like Timothy had mentioned, you can just go to is it Cloud.one? You can just go
Yep.
over through the documentation, and yeah, whatever you need to know, the amazing cool stuff, as Timothy puts it, whatever you need to know, you can just get it from there. Yeah.
Yep.
So
And
somebody from the audience is like, as someone from the audience is saying, it seems I have a new hosting service. Thank you, team, and it was a great session. Yeah,
yep.
thank you so much for that, and thank you once again for honoring, with your presence and your presentation. We are really honored here at GTG Nairobi.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Thank you very much for welcoming me.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so it's lunchtime. For those who had early lunch, it's okay. But then this is the ideal lunchtime. People will take lunch at 1 p.m. onwards. So we will take our lunch break and be back at 2 p.m. We have two more sessions to go. For the gamers who are interested in game development, we have a speaker will be taking us through, game development with, the web and stuff like that. And also we'll be having and someone talked to us about digital transformation with liquid IoT and Google Cloud. For those who don't know what IoT is, then you sure don't want to miss, or if you're interested in this to game development, the last 2 sessions. So yeah, the links will be shared to you so that you can join in immediately after the lunch. So yeah, thank you once again for joining us as this lovely Saturday. We are glad to have you guys on board, and we hope that you're really learning a couple number of things along the way. Yeah. So for now, it's a goodbye for us. Let us take this short break and see you then.
Yeah, just a nudge. We'll be back at 2 p.m. So be sure